Hi, I'm your host, Bob Payne, and I'm here with Russ Wangler. Russ, we've worked together for years now, I think since around 2008, 2009. At least that was our best recollection a moment ago. So what have you seen over the years? How have you seen Agile leaders affect transformations, and what do you think the role of leader is in an Agile transformation?
It's a critical role. And, the term transformation is kind of a loaded term because it depends so much on the context you're in. So maybe a good way to describe it are the things that I've seen that I appreciate the most, as well as the things that I've learned the most from, is probably a good way to talk about it. So what I've appreciated most in leaders that I respected was they had a vision that connected with people. They had this desire to help people discover what their motivation was. And they also were adaptable, and they expected those around them to be adaptable.
Yeah, I know when we did a lot of work with you in the past, I know that there was a strong concentration on continuous improvement. When you say adaptable, are you talking about not only their style, but the organization and expecting others to change along with them, or are you speaking a little more generally?
I think more generally, maybe a good place, an example of adaptable. One of the things that I think gets in people's way when they're trying to execute a transformation is dogma, right?
Yeah.
And they come in and like in a recent situation I was in, the organization started off, they took their project managers, turned them into Scrum Masters, iteration managers. And they said, there was a drum beat from the beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, this is all about empowerment. This is about self-organized teams, right? This is about being able to give people autonomy and just make a step change in our delivery, right? That was kind of the drumbeat. And it's funny. I sat with a distinguished architect in that organization, and I asked him. I said, "Hey, how are things going? Been doing this quote unquote agile thing for 4 years. What do you think?" He says, he said, "We've had some great delivery successes." He said, "But I'm not happy." And I said, "Well, why? What's wrong?" He said, "Well, it's frustrating. I feel like I'm on a pee-wee football team." I'm like, "Pee-wee football team? What do you mean you're on a pee-wee football team?" And what he meant was that he would go to a meeting about an important decision, and the meeting would almost begin, not exactly like this, but I'm setting the context, with this expectation that everybody's equal, everybody's opinion's the same, the whole team must make all decisions. And he said in his experience, what ended up happening was you'd have these really long and drawn out meetings where people who really didn't have the background sometimes to have a strong opinion were voicing strong opinions, and it kind of became a churn, and they weren't able to make good decisions, right? And it kind of got in their way. And I saw this. I was in the same organization, so I saw this too. And so I ended up working a lot with the iteration managers in our function, and I talked to them, trying to get an idea of what's happening, and they were hearing this drumbeat of self-organization and empowerment, and so they were coming to their teams and telling them, right, this is how it is, this is the right way, this is the agile way. And the challenge, that they ended up having was they missed something important, right? They missed that you have to come to people and start working with them from where you find them, not where you expect them to be or where you're told they should be.
Right.
So, for example, I'm sorry, my phone's being annoying.
Yeah, no problem.
So an example of this, they didn't really understand their team, and so they ran into trouble, right? They would say, they heard pairing is important, right? And so they'd say, everybody should pair. Oh, and CMMI says that if you're pairing, you don't need code reviews, so we don't need those, right? So just go and pair. And they didn't get good results, and they weren't sure why, right? Or they would sit and they'd have long meetings about process. What's our process? How are we going to improve it? And they forgot to take people from where they were starting from. I mean, what they didn't do was talk to the team and find out, oh, on this team, half of them are actually quite junior developers. Having them pair together with no help or supervision isn't setting them up for success, right? It's not going to make you go faster. If you're talking to a team that some of whom, let's say a third, are just not interested in process, and you'd have to help bring them along, right? Having them sit for 3 hours and talk about process isn't going to get you somewhere. So those are examples of like how not to lead, right? For a while they were reporting to me, and kind of what I worked with them on was, start thinking about people from where they are, and start helping them realize that self-organization only happens when the team realizes who they are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how they can work together to optimize what they can do as a group given those strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, the analogy I use for empowerment is, you can hand your 11-year-old the keys to the car, but that doesn't mean he or she can actually operate the car, right? So empowerment means authority, autonomy, ability, and probably context or visibility into the greater context in which they're making decisions.
Yeah, that's exactly
a hard environment to set up.
Yeah, it really is. But it's interesting because we talked about another thing that I've seen good motivators or good leaders do well is motivate, right? Mm-hmm. And what I've observed is that motivation, like I can't motivate Bob to do what I want him to do. I can try and force Bob to do something, which may work if I'm in a position of authority for a while, right? But an effective leader, I think, does the reverse of that. They try and figure out what motivates Bob and where's Bob at, right? What's he interested in? I'm definitely a believer in the Daniel Pink idea of autonomy, purpose, and mastery being a key part of motivation. But at the end of the day, you have to help people discover what motivates them and help them kind of achieve those things. And it comes to that empowerment, because if you don't have a clear sense of who you are and what you can do, you might start giving yourself goals that you can't make, which bums you out, right? There has to be a match between what you're trying to do and what you're able to do. And you always want to be reaching a little bit, but if you reach too far, you'll just fall. And failing fast is good, but only when you can really learn from that failure. And if that failure is based on something you don't have enough knowledge about to even know what to do with it, you're not helping. And so I think it's important for people to understand that if you're going to facilitate and you're going to be a leader, you have to take people where they are, help them recognize objectively as you can, what level they're at, and then just help them incrementally grow and help them recognize especially in a software team, who's good at what, who's not good at what, and when the pressure's on, how do you leverage those differences to not only, kick butt, but innovate, right? And to make a step change. So it's tricky, but I see good leaders helping people discover their motivation rather than giving it to them.
Yeah, I think it's also tricky because quite often the setting up that context and knowing when to step back is a really hard thing. Quite often leaders got to the position that they're in by being good at making decisions, and it's hard for them to give that up as well. I don't know if you've seen that.
I've experienced that personally because I've made mistakes in that regard. Because it is hard. It's difficult to know sometimes, right? And the time I think it's the hardest is at kind of towards the beginning, right? So beginning of a relationship. So let's say I joined, let's think of a team from last year. Started working with this team. I didn't really know anybody, so it took a while to kind of understand what was going on. And I'm sure others have had the same experience. Big stressful event, right? We had to make some decisions. The team was struggling. And so sometimes you're forced to just make a call, right? Now, the best leader understands his team or her team. And instead of making the call themselves, right, is collaborative and tries to help facilitate the best result, whether it's from their mind or someone else's. But it takes patience, right, and some awareness of who you're working with. And it's tricky because at some point you just have to go with your gut, right? In the time I'm thinking of, I went with my gut and it wasn't the right one. Because as I learned over the next 6 months, this team had the people that were, we would have had a better decision had I laid back a little bit and just let it churn for another couple of days. Yeah. But that's it, right? And I think being a leader, you got to recognize when you've made that kind of mistake, because if you recognize it and own up to it, that's how you actually build the relationship, right? You say, oh, crap. Yeah, all right, my bad, right? I get it. Here's what I'll do differently, right? And it's tricky just to get the group to a point where you can have that conversation and have people feel comfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Being vulnerable and saying, hey, I screwed up, and having it come across in such a way that it comes across as a natural thing that others might want to emulate versus kind of forced or contrived.
Right.
I think the best leaders are authentic, and they're able to just tell the truth. If you screw it up, you screw it up, right? And if you made a call and you had to make it, given the circumstances, you do it again the same way. You got to just be honest about it. And, you know, I think other people, I think they resonate to that honesty and authenticity. And that's how you connect. And that's how you really can help establish a vision, because there's trust and a shared understanding of what's going on.
Yeah. Have you seen a broader change in the way leaders lead based on, you know, the work with from people like Dan Pink or the servant leadership movement, or, you know, authentic leadership?
Yeah, I have.
Is it just bits and pieces, and we're still running at that same 5 to 10% of leaders that actually naturally do those things already?
I mean, I think the fact that we're having a conversation about it, and it's normal to have that conversation, right? And when I was at Nationwide, that was happening. When I was at the Gap, it was happening. That's a good thing. I think the principal's challenge is more. I feel for the CTO, right? Or I feel for the VP of engineering, who understands and believes, right, in these principles, and wants to help drive their organization to internalize them and to do something with them. Yet they do that in a real world, right, where there's time pressure, where there's people making mistakes. There are some people who just aren't very nice people, and you kind of have to figure out how to work through all that. And the thing that strikes me is that the ones who do it well have a respect for understanding the organization first and understanding the key players. And then once you find where they're kind of struggling, get them the support they need experientially to make the change, right? To kind of adopt or to start to discover and believe in some of these deeper facts. And that's hard as heck, right? It's just hard because there's a difference between someone who recognizes the truth of an idea or principle and tries to live it, and someone who can help others understand it and help it kind of, you know, in fact. And I think that's tricky. And I'd say that if there was a key weakness that I see a lot, it's that one, right? You got the right heads on shoulders, but when they try to execute, it kind of gets lost because they're standing at the top of the organization saying, go here, right? Without recognizing, kind of similar to our discussion of working with a single team, where the people are, what they're able to do so that they can match, right, the new knowledge and the new behaviors to what people can actually adopt. And I think that's the sticky wicket, you know what I mean? And that's the sticky part.
Yeah, there's this cultural paradox, I think, organizationally, that, you know, we always talk about, you know, culture is the most important thing in an organizational change, but it's also the thing that is least pliable with the tools that we have. It's the last thing to change in an organization, and you can't actually know that it's changed until everybody who started the change has left.
Yeah.
And it continues on. I think back to walking into a team that we had at Nationwide, Fish Bluefish. Nobody there that had been there initially, and they still had sorry, I've got a dog barking. They still had the motto of zero defects, right? And that it was that cultural piece was a norm for them.
Yeah. I mean, cultures, it's such it's unspoken, right? It's a collection of beliefs and behaviors that often go unquestioned. And, you know, what I found is I've never seen a magic pill, right, that handles it at the broad organizational level. But what I have seen is in groups of, you know, 7 to 12 people, of teams working towards having some goal to work towards together. they can behave their way into a new way of thinking, right? They can experience, when facilitated well and working with each other, they can recognize key improvements that make step changes and stick with them. But it comes as a part of a shared experience. And I think translating that shared experience that you can achieve in, let's say, 6 months of learning how to do XP on a team to 70 teams or 20 teams, that's tricky, right? Because I think one of the reasons culture starts to stick is we're doing something together, we're experiencing it together, and we get this intuitive understanding that it works, right? And as soon as you've got a large group who are only tangentially working together, right? They see each other in a scrum, or they have lunch together. It's a little bit more difficult for them to relate, right? And I think that's probably a barrier, right? That I haven't figured out how to get beyond. Right. Then go team by team and hope that when you get to some certain critical mass, it just takes off.
Yeah, and I think one of the problems that leaders have is they need that that guiding coalition, that group of middle managers and teams that are actually going to be the early adopters and champions. Quite often, unfortunately, I see we have the two parts of the cookie, right? We've got leaders that are interested in change, some teams that are interested in change, and then trying to connect up through the hierarchy becomes the trick. You know, how do we create a critical mass that goes tip to tail?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I saw work at Nationwide, and I had limited success, I think, due to the circumstances that Gap doing, was that this idea that people that work together, right, build together, are able to connect and make, you know, and create that culture, that connection, right? So, for example, at Nationwide, it was all of the delivery leaders, the middle managers, got together and all had to agree on what Agile meant, right? They had to be able to describe it together. They had to define what they all thought it meant, and then they worked with their teams on that, right? That shared goal is kind of what I was referring to earlier, is just that connectedness, that shared experience. Mm-hmm. And what I observe at a lot of companies is, and have experienced, is that you've got, like, whatever you call them, your directors of technical management, they have so much going on in their professional life that the connectedness between each director or each of the technical managers is not that strong. They go to a staff meeting, but other than that, they don't have a shared goal, because that's your project, that's my project, right? I think similar to common and how it relates an organization to the kind of software it develops, I think the way we structure teams and the way we make them interdependent, I think will have an influence on the ability to kind of develop a shared culture. And I think this connects, you know, I think paradoxically to how to have a larger number of smaller, durable teams delivering large, you know, complex software efforts. Because historically, you know, the project manager would say, hey, limit dependencies, right? The fewer dependencies I have between teams, the easier it is for me to manage, because I'm going to manage the dependencies.
Right.
Right. But maybe if you flip that on its head, and I think this is part of what you might be, and I'm curious to see if you're seeing this, if in organizations that have smaller durable teams, where small as, let's say, 8 to 12 engineers, mm-hmm. And they're successful, there's like 20 teams, are you seeing a situation where they're able to take a project, which is a related set of features that, let's say, has to encompass 5 teams, and are they able to structure the work, right, such that they're kind of elegantly handling the interdependencies between the teams and the software? Because that would give us the shared goal, right, and it would give us the connectedness to build that culture, while at the same time improving our ability to deliver. Oops, I think I lost you.
Sorry, I'm just letting the dog out so it stops barking. Yeah, one of the big problems, and you've hit it right on the head, that you don't need to scale software, you need to scale dependencies. And in fact, there's a lot of work being done in this sort of descaling arena. Like, how do we actually create systems that allow us to have independent teams work work on pieces and remain somewhat independent. But the reality is, you're there. You used a word that I love and loathe at the same time, which is elegant, because unfortunately, when you get large-scale dependencies, whether they're internal to a team or between teams, nothing it tends to be elegant. You're looking for the least worst balance between the number of teams, the size of teams, and quite often, I think what organizations have failed to do is they've failed to imagine how they could descale the problem, how they could, change, move. We hear a ton about microservice architecture, Docker containers with allowing you to have a level of virtualization and ways of managing things across parts of this larger system. The biggest problem I see is people take those technologies and they build really nasty things that all need to be deployed together. So
right.
So they've missed the point of the purpose of the sort of great things out of those technologies. I think every organization is somewhat unique. I hate the idea of snowflakes, but when you look at what is the particular system, what is the customer experience we're trying to solve for, how many people do we actually need to do this? Is there a way to break it up smaller? How many teams need to be sort of feature cross-functional teams, and how many need to be component teams, just because there is, a benefit for that team to be working together on a single component or architectural piece. It really is not elegant. It's like politics, maybe not quite as bad as current presidential politics, but it really is like politics and sausage making. You really need to get in, work at it, make mistakes, and do just continuous improvement to try to get it right. But I think one of the problems I see, and I'd be interested in seeing what your thoughts are, I see a lot of organizations assuming that they need to scale rather than assuming that they need to think hard how to keep smaller teams. It's still a lot of work either way, but.
Well, this is actually a quick digression, then we'll just dive to the center of that remark, because I am fundamentally aligned with it. In terms of things that I've noticed that really bother me is this whole idea that Agile is Scrum. And in many organizations, it's all about Scrum, right? And you bring in the Scrum Masters and you bring in the mechanical practices, and hey, we're Agile, right? We're in the rags, we're saying we're Agile. And you end up with a different version of your old problems. And that's because, well, what is it exactly that in a software, an IT organization delivering software, what is it that they do? They build software, right? And if you're focused on how to manage things, well, you're not going to be you won't be as successful as you could be if you only focus on managing pieces, right? You need to understand what's actually being delivered and figure out how it's to best deliver it. So, for example, to the heart of your comment about descaling, if we think about, I think what extreme programming and XP was meant to be, right? It was meant to take software and just take things to the extreme. If a little bit of unit testing is good, a bunch is better, right? If a little bit of collaboration is good, a bunch is better. And what was it after, right? It was really after simplicity. It was after validated simplicity. And because you figured it's complex enough to build heavy-duty software, right? So if you bend that idea, right, and you apply good software engineering practices and mindsets to this problem of how do I descale, I think you end up with some good answers, and you get what much of the technology could potentially enable, which is loosely coupled, tightly aligned organizations and systems, right? But it's tricky. Because first you have to have enough engineers who understand that frame of reference, because it's not, what's a good example, right? So What's a good one? Well, I'll keep it simple. If you're at a stand-up, nice practical story. We're at a stand-up, right? And the team's talking. Okay, Russ, so I was working on the login page, about halfway done. I had a problem with the authentication service, but I think I got it solved. That's it. Okay, that's kind of talking about somebody's experience, but it doesn't tell me anything meaningful, right? So what if this developer instead to say, I was working in the login page, I was calling the authentication service, and I noticed that for me to use this service, I have to stand up like a boatload of code. I didn't even have my workstation configured such that I could handle all the dependencies that it brought in. That's a problem, because this is hard, right? There has to be a better way to do this. Now we're starting to have a dialogue related to the nature of the software, right? And if you take that dialogue to its logical conclusion and start figuring out how to keep it simple, how to keep the parts coupled only where they absolutely need to be, right? We'd be heading in the right direction, I think, because then we'd be having teams that are doing basically the same thing. They'll be, let's take Spotify as an example, right? So the Spotify organization breaks itself up into significant responsibilities or concerns within their product, right? You've got a part of the product team that handles the player. You've got product team that handles playlists. And they each kind of treat those components as their part of the product or their product, right? And now they're able to focus on the concern and the responsibility they're accountable for. But of course, you can't run the player if there isn't an interface to the playlist, right? And yada yada. So if we can bring those two things together, right? This idea that there's business functionality that's relevant from an architectural perspective that needs to be a component because it has a large enough scope, right? That it needs an individualized attention, and that it needs to interact with the rest of the stuff around it in a healthful way, right? That's appropriate. Then we'll start getting there, because I think the teams then would have a tendency to coalesce, right, around these functions, as you saw in Spotify. But these are kind of lofty ideas, right? I mean, as soon as you get to a corporation that has, 20 teams, normally in projects, it's hard to take that understanding of, or that perception of the way the software actually is, and share it with the executive team and share it with the with business partners in a way that helps them accept or desire to change the structure of the organization to better fit what they're delivering or what they're managing. And I think when I think about extreme programming and practices, to me, where it's really going is trying to get enough of that middle management aware, right, of the realities of the software that they're managing or building, so that they can lead, right? So they can work with their architects and developers and figure out what the right structure, right, is for how to build and maintain this thing. Because from that, I think the organizational part will start to flow, and it would become easier. But there's such a chasm today, right, between, often the leadership who are more project managers than technical managers, and that gap is a problem, right? And so, one of the drums I beat is, if you're going to be a software manager, then you need to understand software. You need to pay attention. You don't have to be a great programmer, but you have to understand how it works, why it works, right? And these subtleties related to quality and coupling that can either set you free, right, if you're loosely coupled and well tested, or be a chain around your leg that will literally drown you when you try to make an aggressive change.
Yeah, and not only that, but I think up through the business leadership, and understanding that most organizations are at some level software organizations. Some are exclusively software.
Yeah.
Organizations that understand that aren't structured in the sort of traditional business versus IT. They're somewhat indistinguishable insofar as the the business doesn't exist without IT.
Yeah.
Amazon is an amazing logistics company, but that's only true because they also have an amazing IT infrastructure.
Yeah.
And they, I think they fundamentally get that. I'm seeing a lot more mainline organizations moving in that direction as well. You've got, Cap One, their CEO sort of says, we want to be, a world-class IT organization that happens to have a bank associated with it. Sort of that Amazon Netflix model. Now, I don't know, we'll see how that's a big organization move. Any organization is, but I'm seeing a movement towards. I've seen this idea of no projects emerging, at least at the fringes. I see organizations, even in the government, standing up standing delivery teams, and then with the explicit idea that they will vary the scope to that team to sort of maximize their return on investment. DevOps, I think, is driving some changes and has really caught people's imagination and can fundamentally tie the feedback mechanism from the business and IT, to really close that loop. And what is the customer experience? How are we delivering? What delivers real value? So I see movements that I think will drive us more in that lean, agile direction. Technically, I don't know. I'm hoping that's not just a little blip in the signal, but I think things are starting to turn.
Yeah, I mean,
it's wrong.
It's tough. But it's tough. When you're in a situation where I'm a big believer in natural synergies, right, as a place to drive step change. So, for example, if you're at a retailer, it's probably more straightforward for you to look at becoming more responsive when you're dealing with, let's say, your direct channel website, right? Because you can A/B test changes, you can measure whether or not it made a difference. And the reality is there is no right or wrong. You have to experiment with the experience to see what levers will actually drive value. There are I've seen situations where the image size can add a point of conversion just because the image was a little bigger. And it's things that you wouldn't expect to be true that are. So when you're in a situation where you can get customer feedback quickly, I think it's probably a little bit easier for people to start to understand the value. When you're dealing with back-end systems that are quite complex and mission critical, let's say, back-end claims processing for an insurer, or some aspect of shipping, right, or logistics for procurement, let's say, for a large retailer, it's a little bit trickier because the feedback loops you have are less direct, right? The measurements are less direct, and it's harder for people to wrap their arms around. But I tell you, we were talking about adaptability. Let's have fun. Let's take a abrupt change in direction. Because we've gotten kind of ethereal.
Right.
So let's take something practical. One of the things that absolutely makes me crazy when it comes to Agile dogma, and I just saw this on LinkedIn. Somebody asked the question. They said, "What's the right situation for a waterfall project versus an Agile project?" When I read this, I thought to myself, "Wow, I didn't expect a question, right?" Because for me, I wouldn't frame it that way, because my experience suggests that's not the right way to frame it. For example, like things that come to mind which weren't in the thread, which I really should reply to. If it has a predictable outcome, like doing small enhancements, then it should probably be waterfall. And I'm just thinking to myself, really? Have you worked in a corporate IT shop? The enhancements to systems that are intrinsically and mistakenly complex that's not predictable at all. Ask the people who work on them whether it's predictable. When they tell you they spend a week doing analysis before they change a line of COBOL code, that should be the first thing that tells you, right, that it's not understandable and it's not easily predictable. Or, or if you look at it from a more simple perspective that requires less technical competence, you could just say, if you have the opportunity to bring the definition of requirements closer to actual implementation and get rid of the additional step of writing it all down in a document just to translate it from a document to a solution, wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, why wouldn't you? There's money savings there, and there's no practical value add that I can see, right, that comes from writing it down before you're actually going to use it anyway. So it surprises me that that some of this misperception is still there. Like another example, and then I'll shut up. People have asked me, I have developers on teams and tech leads, right, who will get very upset about big upfront design. Right? They'll say, oh, we can't talk about that. That's big upfront design. I'm like, well, context. And what are you talking about? Well, big upfront design, you can't predict that. It's just a complete waste of time. And I loved Uncle Bob's comment on that. He said, I think that's bull crap, except he didn't say crap. He said, if it's a large, complex system, I want to take some time because I don't want to code myself into a box I can't get out of. But more practically, two projects that I've been involved in the last 3 years. One, and I got pushed back on both of these, and both from tech leads and developers. The one was a warehouse management system implementation, had to be done in 4.5 months, or it was a huge business problem. We had true subject matter experts from product management, infrastructure, and technology on the team. They'd done similar implementations literally 4 to 5 times before. In this case, the way we approached it was we did a month of research on how much things cost in the past, and then we had a 2.5 week inception or discovery, where literally the experts in this case, who were developers, wrote out, I think it was like 175 or 250 stories that they said, that's what we need. And, some were saying, oh my God, that's big upfront design, you're not agile. And you know what the outcome of that project was? Our burn-up was a beautiful, nice, smooth line. And of all the stories we wrote, let's just say it was 200 because I don't remember the right number. There were about 180 of them that were pretty much on the mark. There were 20 that nobody really understood and said so at the time that we ended up refactoring in a dramatic way. And it worked great. And I don't see anything wrong with that, right? Because it just worked well. Everybody was comfortable, and we had a really good outcome. On the other hand, another project, same organization, the next 2 years later, we were in a completely different situation. We were trying to create an attribute service that was used by other services in a brick and mortar point of sale system. And the truth was, we really didn't understand it very well. And we kind of knew that going in. So we also spent 2 weeks, but it was mostly trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And when we left that room, within a month, we all knew the plan was completely screwed. And we had to just throw it out, and we had to start over again. And we didn't do another inception. We just said, hey, what do we not know? Where do we get rid of some risk? And we iterated. And that project actually ended up being one of my proudest, because we ended up in a situation where the team figured out that by flipping the paradigm of the user experience on its head to better match the customer experience that was required, these were internal customers, we actually saved the project and delivered early. So I guess my point is that adaptability has to do with understanding delivery, understanding the circumstances, and doing the right thing based on the people, what they know, how they work, what the situation is. There isn't an answer. There isn't a do waterfall, do agile. I'm not even sure what that, I mean, I know what it means at a high level, right? Like, yeah, I don't want to write all my requirements down for months and months and months. That's just crazy. But at the same time, what people understand, what's knowable, what's not knowable, those are all inputs, right, to effective agile delivery. And so it makes me crazy when I see consultants, or when I see talking heads, being so dogmatic and acting as if there is an answer. No, there's a range of answers.
Right.
Right? And when I said adaptable leader, that's what I meant, right?
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the circumstances and making the best informed choices you can.
I think there's some funny behavior that goes around that big upfront design, because I think what everybody sort of agrees they thought they were talking about at the time, and everybody sort of misunderstood, at least the XP folks, and is what is barely sufficient, what is just in time mean, terms like the last responsible moment, and sometimes if it's I might say if that the data warehousing project went as smoothly as it did, you probably could have started a little earlier. Yeah, but that's just a data point, right? You got to the end and you delivered on time and what they needed. So great, right? But it could, there's the sort of joke in the Spotify Engineering Culture Part 2, which is the quote by Mario Andretti, that if everything is under control, you're not going fast enough. But I don't want to use that as an excuse for recklessness, but it is a balancing act, and it is context sensitive, and I think good leaders, good managers, highly effective teams understand that.
Yeah, because it just, when you see it in, like, if I add a little bit more information, all of a sudden maybe it makes even more sense. For the warehouse management system, it was a package. It was the 5th implementation of the package this group had done.
Right.
Gee, not a surprise, right? They already understood most of what they needed to know, and the stuff they didn't, they admitted and figured out as they went. Mm-hmm. Versus the other one, everybody admitted up front, we have guesses about what we think this might be, and it turned out some of them were rather wrong. Mm-hmm. Right? And we just flipped it. So it's the context and the willingness to say what you know and you don't know,
right, makes
a huge difference.
Yeah, I actually like, and I don't know if you've seen, have you seen the Josh Kirievsky's Modern Agile movement?
No.
And it's very interesting. The key, looking at the site, it's a little tough to glean, but he did a keynote at Agile 2016 that I think you might be interested in. He boiled modern Agile movement down to 4 basic principles, and that is make people awesome. And that he took the work, sort of the book Badass, and this idea of customer experience, melded it with this idea that we want to make, if we're using Scrum, product owners awesome, stakeholders awesome, teams awesome, and customers awesome, right? I think a lot of the Agile movement early on seems to have focused almost exclusively on the team. And hoped that product owners or our customers or whoever we were doing work for knew what they wanted. But I think that experience from lean startup and customer experience and a number of other movements helped. So that's one principle. The other was deliver value continuously. To production, continuous delivery of value. Experiment and learn. And safety is a prerequisite. Both cultural safety, safety for the customer, and technical safety. So this idea that if we're going to go fast, we need to go fast well. And it's something that you saw built into XP. This idea of paired programming, TDD, and rapid feedback cycles was all about safety. I wanted to have broken it as soon as possible.
Yeah, I'm very much aligned with those 4 principles. And
they're kind of outcome based, or you could shift them all to be really outcome based rather than practice. Do this.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why later.
Yeah, exactly. You can. It's better to it kind of comes back to. What's that pithy? It's easier to behave yourself into a way of thinking than thinking yourself into a way of behaving, right? Because if you're doing something, you're getting feedback that you know what to do with, and you're continuously improving, you're probably in a healthful spot, right? If I'm doing that, I'm likely not trying to be 20 times ahead of myself or 20 steps ahead. I'm just doing what I'm capable of doing and a little more, right? Which is key. I think it comes back to incremental feedback leading to mastery, which a lot of people thirst for, right? That's kind of what they're looking for in their job.
Great. So what new, we started talking about leadership. I think we've sort of gone maybe a little bit off that path. But what have you learned in the past, I don't know, few months related to leadership that you think is exciting and new, or is it really just a reflection on a broad and grand past?
I don't know. I don't know that there's anything brand spanking new. I think probably one of the things that has really struck me, though, and we've already talked about it, is this idea that if you're trying to influence change across an organization, then the leaders need to have an opportunity to do something together to realize that change. And I mean physically together. Because if you're separate and you're all, it's kind of like, okay, our goal is to better adopt Scrum and to deliver twice as fast, right? If everybody's if the leaders, the middle management is all kind of off running around trying to do that and not doing it together, it's incohesive. And it's not as effective as it would be had the senior leadership figured out how to set an objective that all those folks shared, mm-hmm. and set them up and gave them an opportunity to help each other achieve it. It's a very simple thing, but mm-hmm. in pretty much every organization I've worked in, I've seen this pattern, right, where that level of leader, and it may be why organizations get stuck when they try to change in this middle level, it's kind of unfair. They're isolated, right? They're isolated because they get all these responsibilities. My brother jokes that he's a SVP, and he jokes that, I think the hardest job is actually at the director level, because they actually have to deliver, right, every day and drive organizational change. If you're a VP, you can at least focus just on the org part. You're less day to day. And maybe there's a secret in there, right? That a good strategy, right, is to find a way to have a shared objective that's meaningful, that causes the team, those leaders, to have to work together. And perhaps in an idealistic sense, if it's leading towards their software, the software that their teams are building, being more appropriately designed and interacting more effectively, mm-hmm. then maybe that's a way to get there, right? Maybe there's an opportunity in the small, durable team landscape, right, to start to bring that middle management together towards a goal that they can all work on every week. Because I have a feeling they become more powerful. They as a group might help the organization become more powerful and more able to adapt quickly. Because instead of learning in silos, they're learning together, right? Which ideally would cause continuous improvement to really start to blossom in a more meaningful and observable way if you were the VP. So I guess that would be it, right? And figuring out ways of making that happen, I think is the trick.
Yeah, drive collaboration rather than cooperation.
Yeah, and it's kind of back to motivation, right? I can tell you, Bob, you should be working with Daryl and John to fix this problem. But if you all have different parts of the problem, and they don't really relate, and you just got to give each other status updates once in a while, not so much. But if, as a leader, I can say, you know what, I'm actually going to change the structure of how we're delivering. Let's talk together about how we might reorient things so that you can kind of collectively work toward that goal. Maybe create a tiger team or something that they're on with some others. Mm-hmm. You might get a better outcome, right, than just trying to motivate me by saying, hey, it's a big organizational goal. Give me a goal that I can work with others collaboratively and see incremental improvement and drive it day to day, versus let's talk at the end of the month and see if we got better.
Great. Yeah, I really I love John Cotter's work on leading change. It's kind of an oldie that I never knew about until it got republished, I think last year sometime. He talks a lot about creating that that platform, that guiding coalition, and how to focus everybody's work on the goals that we're trying to get to. So
I have a good question for you, because I'm just really dying to know. Over the past 4 years, I've been focused and an advocate of small, durable teams. And I'm curious, as I look around, other than some exceptional circumstances such as Spotify or shops that are really, in a way, one product shops, like Amazon, there's so much more than one product. Right, we can simplify to say that it's a whole large organization that really is focused on one consistent thing. But for more typical organizations like a large insurer or a bank, what patterns have you seen that are starting to take root that enable small, durable teams to thrive? And how have these organizations fed them work and dealt with changing demand year on year?
So I think there's a couple of things in there. I certainly see the small durable team taking root. I think it is a little more hit or miss whether the organization understands what they're doing. And I kind of want to challenge one thing that you said, because if you look at, say, a big financial services organization, you say somebody like Spotify or Amazon are doing that one thing. It's only one, or Apple is doing that one thing. It's only one thing because they approach it fundamentally from the customer experience. When I do banking with Cap One, or I get insurance from, say, Nationwide, or I get a retirement product from Vanguard, I have one experience. The fact that they're broken up is more based on the fact that they haven't flipped the switch and started to view it from the other angle. I think the next big wave, I think, will be businesses fundamentally realigning around this idea that they are one thing, and maybe they need to draw a really big umbrella to cover all of the things that they currently are, to try to get some unifying themes going. But fundamentally, they've structured their organizations in a really bizarre way. Some companies grow by acquisition, and that's understandable. But at some point, the customer doesn't care. The customer doesn't care about your system, or the fact that you're doing the customer service app for servicing this loan or this credit card. They see you as, brand X, big company, and I do financial stuff with brand X. So I think that flip is going to take a little bit longer. I start to see things happening. I think there are some perils there that they'll treat IT as a cathedral rather than a bazaar, and either they'll fail from that peril, or they'll fail from not getting enough guiding principles, enough context around the bazaar for small, durable teams to actually do good things.
Yeah, no, I hear that, because if you were to talk to Spotify or Amazon, I'm sure they're well aware of their internal complexity, and they might quarrel with my language as well. But let me ask the question a different way. So, in my last role, one of the things we're, as an organization, really struggling with a bit is moving from a project-centric world that brought teams together for a project and disbanded them, into a product and team-centric world. And the physical change of saying, hey, you're on a team and that's your product, you can just do that, right? See how long it lasts, but you can kind of just force that part of it. It gets trickier when you start saying, okay, well, now our business has these 10 initiatives, right? Varying from 20 million down to 500,000. Let's take a bite-sized one, which hopefully more of them are. Let's say it's 1 million, right? And we want to now satisfy that work across this set of teams who may also already be working on something else. So now I have a compositional problem, right? I want to keep these teams together. I don't want to overwhelm them with 20 different things. But at the same time, I want to keep them together. So how do I manage that? How does the organization structure to support those small durable teams, given the demand is coming from multiple places at once?
Yeah, I think it's a pattern that you see to a certain extent in this idea of an agile release train in SAFe. It's certainly not a new idea, but trying to get the right composition of capabilities across several small teams, get some level of portfolio management across those teams, and then manage the demand based on value and make it technically easy for teams to switch between products or technologies. The engineers need to start to become more polyglots. They need to understand more projects, more technologies. They need to be more truly cross-functional. And there are lots of strategies for helping to build that up. But there really is only a couple of solutions. One is dedicate a few teams to a product and then go fishing for important work to do on that product, which I think is the wrong answer, because it optimizes for the team and not for the organization. So I think you need some level of aggregation and a view of the portfolio, and then dissemination. So bring the work together, look at it across, and either you have teams that are in a more cohesive structure because they have a lot of dependencies, like an agile release train, or just a portfolio of teams that you can start to feed these initiatives to. And I see more of that happening. I see actual at Citizenship and Immigration Service. So in the federal government, they're standing up portfolio teams for major sections of their IT portfolio. They might have 4 or 5 teams that support active enhancements, new feature development on 10 or 15 products, and maybe 20 other legacy products for bug fix. Now, does that have its challenges? Absolutely, but it at least pivots the prioritization based on organizational value and alignment rather than on capacity. It also allows us to take the most important thing across all of our initiatives and bring those forward, rather than running a project through to completion. So doing the piddly, nice to have stuff on project A before I can get the critically important stuff on project B started. And that's part of the whole no projects movement that I think, or hope, and given how long it has taken for Agile to become mainstream, maybe I'll have to wait for my children to see this change, but I hope this will take over as the main topic.
I've been reading about the no projects thing, and just for fun, let's challenge the idea for a minute, and see if we can draw it into the context of our conversation. So it seems like there's a conflation happening with that, and that is this idea that, since a project has a beginning and a discrete end, that it then implies that the group and the focus then is lost as soon as that's over, and you just forget about it and move on. That may not always be the case.
Sure.
Right. I guess we're in the context now. So what I was really trying to ask is that, agreed with everything you said, right? You don't want to have teams that are aligned with just a part of the business, because they'll have a tendency to, through inertia, draw work that maybe doesn't have the best value picture. So that you don't want that. You do want durable teams, but they have to be able to move and follow the value. You need a portfolio, right, that's structured to be watching and doing value comparisons of initiatives. But it's in the implementation detail, I think, that my question really arises. So the challenge, right, that I was seeing is that as we look at the portfolio, right, the business would say, well, the business case is I want to save X on shipping by no longer offering as much free shipping. I need to sell the value to my customer. Okay, cool. Now to do that, I've got changes in the shipping system. I've got changes that I need to test in the UI, et cetera. Okay. Now, if I've got smaller durable teams working in, let's say, the UI and in shipping, as an example, now the challenge becomes, okay, fine. So I know my goal, this business case that requires features in these areas. Mm-hmm. And the second piece is, okay, so if I want to coherently drive those features forward, because I know they must go together, right, to work, because they physically depend on each other. I can't change the website to offer less free shipping if I don't also make these changes over here in the shipping app, yeah. Right, or in the promotions app. So the question then becomes, one, it's implied that this quote-unquote project now has to have been decomposed into the features, right, as they relate to the different components that yep. these teams serve or are currently serving, even if they're not sticky to a product. And then once I've done that, I need a means of kind of monitoring and ensuring that those things go together, right? So for example, I can get myself into trouble because this shipping feature is now competing in the shipping product manager's mind with this one over here. And this, you can get into these weird situations where the shipping product manager is obsessing about this feature because it's one they've always wanted. This one actually drives more aggregate value, right? But it's sometimes hard to see, right? So my question really is, what techniques have you seen organizations use to get that level of decomposition and then ensure, right, that those features are moving through the organization in a reasonable way to deliver the value?
Sure. I think you're pointing to a couple of things. One, in the situation that you're describing, there are relatively hard dependencies between the teams to actually realize the value. Yep. When that happens, it is inevitable that any given team, any given product owner for the team, the value, that team is subordinate to the integrated value across the teams. So right. In that situation, unfortunately, there really isn't much, a much better solution than driving up collaboration, coordination, prioritization, and probably testing at that next highest level. So if you look at Spotify, they talk about, when we do big projects, we often have a technical and a product person, working across teams. You can see teams where that is, a product owner council that gets together. You also have some organizations where there's product management or some overarching decisions that are made organizationally or within that context that get driven down to the teams. Regardless of where it happens, the teams lose a bit of autonomy in the same way that, the Toyota teams can't just all of a sudden say, well, shit, I'm tired of making, I'm tired of installing Camry transmissions and I'm on the Camry line, right? There is, by the very nature that they're working collectively in an organization, trying to deliver value at that higher level, there needs to be some structure for prioritization. You can make it as flat as possible, and I recommend that. Descale it to the level that is barely sufficient. I don't know what that looks like, but it looks like some sort of pyramid or an oval with a little bit of a point, whether it's a collection of architects and technical folks getting together to look at how do all these pieces work together, product management, making decisions, and driving, if they happen to work on the teams, driving their own teams in that direction. But there needs to be some level of cohesion and coordination. And the same is true if you have very loosely coupled systems. If the customer view is that I can't buy this thing until all the pieces, all the little loosely coupled microservices and UIs are there to get it to me, then someone needs to be taking a look at that cross-organizational priority. Otherwise, you have you've optimized for the team and not for the whole.
Yep. Hey, hang on one second. I just realized my battery's about to die. Let me grab my plug.
And we're almost at an hour, so
it may be perfect, but I don't want to lose you. I'll be right back.
Okay, great.
There we go. Much safer.
Excellent.
Yeah. The pattern you're describing, I've talked to people that work at Amazon, and they actually, their organizational structure supports the behavior you just described, right? So their answer to the question was, at least as was told to me, was they've got somewhat durable teams. The teams can move around the organization.
And I do like the word durable rather than stable, because stable implies not changing. Durable implies mostly together with some movement.
Because people, it needs to change a little bit. It should keep changing a little, just not too much at once. And what they'll do is they'll basically have, if you're on a medium-sized project, they deliver in 3-month value chunks. So quarterly, they try to keep things small and loosely coupled. So keep things as small as they can. So let's say you might have a technical leader, a senior developer, what they call a ninja. They kind of, with a product manager, drive a solution together. When they have a much larger initiative that maybe requires 6 teams, then they'll appoint each of the 3 roles to 3 people who then are accountable for making sure the coordination happens across all the teams. And they do pretty much what you described, right? The ninja will work ahead about a month or 2. And if they have to go into a new area of the architecture or a new part of the application the current team is not familiar with, that ninja will go in, study, talk to experts, bring that knowledge back to the team. So when that team stays together and moves to that part of the system, right, they have some knowledge, they know how things should be thought of there. I think it seems to me the trick of pulling this off, this idea that we're describing, small durable teams, decomposing these projects into, because these big chunks of stuff, they're often too darn big anyway. $4 million is, I think, too much. If you decompose it into pieces, right, then really you just have a slightly different problem now, right? The first problem is you've got to be able to decompose it in a sensible way, know enough up front that you can pull that off, which will be a constraint, right? And then your second problem is that as you start pulling that through the organization, you're going to have a reasonable understanding of capacity across the impacted teams. Otherwise you're going to be at odds. And, it's almost like, in my imagination, because I haven't experienced it, I almost begin to think now more like a lean manufacturing paradigm, where now it's about bottlenecks. Which parts of the overall system and solution are the ones that are most highly traveled, end up being the bottleneck. That's probably where the complexity and where the refactoring needs to happen.
Yep.
So, I'm looking forward to an opportunity to experience that environment, because I think a lot of value is.
Yeah, and it's an experience that I've seen in lots of organizations. It gets a little ugly. But one of the things that I really like that SAFE did, that we practiced for a long time, is that all of the team members, the teams actually get together to plan for a slightly longer chunk of time, and the teams hash out dependencies. So the pattern becomes, rather than a self-organizing team of individuals that we have at this durable team level, but a self-organizing team of teams that in fact may say team A and team B are going to merge or pair, or this is not the right structure. We need to split cav off team C to do something. That pattern driven by the teams and that small coordination layer at the top. It's part of that agile release train concept, and I think it's a good one, that this planning together, demoing and delivering together. You see that at Spotify as well. that demo integrated pieces rather than just individual stuff, and understand and track that the value is delivered at the integrated level. And a lot of Scrum teams feel very uncomfortable with that because they're losing their autonomy. They love to run and gun. And I would work really hard to descale it so you can have kick-ass individual Agile teams doing it. But if you can't, then trying to get that mindset in place is important. And sort of pull it back, I think it requires leadership and management change to be able to have people start to think about these larger goals rather than my system. I see this in organizations that have product teams. The teams love their product, and all of a sudden, that product is on the decommission list, and there's hurt feelings and anger, but it just doesn't make market sense for the company to keep that product around. I had this one great product owner or product manager that came into a meeting and said, I know we've worked a lot and we have 20 systems based on where the company's going and what we're doing. We're probably only going to keep 8 to 10 of those systems. 5 of them are going to go on life support, and the rest are going to be actively decommissioned. And I'm really sorry, but this is about creating a viable space where we can all work together and be awesome.
Yeah.
The term that modern Agile has sort of brought in and made a little more real that I really like is how can we make this team of teams, this organization, this team, this leadership team, how can we be awesome?
Yeah, well, I think it's interesting that there are parallels to good software development and good software architecture, right? You want to have, I think in this context, if I'm hearing you right, if I read it back, what I'd say is, let's say we have 6 teams, right? And I think I heard Fowler talking about this as something they've tried at ThoughtWorks as well. When they have a situation where you've got multiple teams sharing a dependency, right? They'll create some stories, right, that are the ones that require this level of integration. They'll then have a small team comprised of people from these various teams kind of work together. They don't fully leave their team. They're just kind of coordinating, and they may pair, right, with members of the other team to make sure that things are smooth. And they work that integration, and they feel they're connected, right? They understand. And when I think about good software design or architecture, we're right back to loosely coupled, tightly aligned, and the reality is some things are appropriate to couple. They must be to perform their function. It's just a question of choosing that wisely and implementing it with good technique.
Right.
So that it's maintainable and it's not a chain around your leg, right? It's actually a balloon that's helping you rise above the competition.
The universe should be as simple as possible and no simpler.
That's right. Well, hey, this has been fun. This has been a fun talk.
Well, thank you so much, Russ. I really appreciate it. And we're going to be out in your neck of the woods soon, so hopefully we'll get together in person soon.
I'd enjoy it. Good talking to you, Bob.
Nice talking to you.
All right. See you.
Bye.